Canon Story Company presents Page and Stage, the podcast that explores the art and craft of writing and performance. I'm your host, Jason Cannon, and if you want to learn more about why stories matter and how to tell yours, come visit me at canonstory.com. That's C-A-N-N-O-N story.com. A quick reminder that I put links to each guest's full bio, websites, and projects in the show notes, so be sure to go check them out. Now, let's meet our guest for this episode of the Page and Stage podcast. All right, everyone. As you just heard in the intro, this is the Page and Stage podcast, and I am so excited to have the one and only Bill Malone, Bill Malone here with me, all the way from Newfoundland. I think you're my first international guest. No. I did interview an Australian once. I have an Australian guest. You're my first Canadian guest for sure. Now, Bill, I got to tell everybody, Bill's story is amazing. He's actually a career first responder. He was in the Canadian. He was a Mountie. I'm going to get all the words wrong, Bill. I've read your book, but I'm still going to get it all wrong.
That's okay.
Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Correct.
Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And he has turned author. And so that's why he is on this podcast to talk about his upcoming book. And I've had the great honor of seeing Bill in action. We've been to some workshops together, and the courage and generosity of this man, I just can't wait for you all to get to know him. Bill, welcome to the Page and Stage podcast.
Well, thanks, Jason. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. So thank you for that.
Awesome. All right. So I usually start my podcast because I typically interview, actors, directors, playwrights, writers, public speakers, anyone who is creating stories. That's not your primary first career. You were a first responder. You were a cop. But I still want to ask you about your storyteller origin story. So at some point you retired, and because I know this is your second book. You wrote your first book about your experience in Afghanistan back in 2018.
Correct.
So go take us back to 2016, 17. I'm sure it's somewhere in there. But what all of a sudden changed in your life? What inspired Bill Malone to turn into a writer?
Well, it may seem strange to say, but I had no intention on writing a book in the first place. When I came back from Afghanistan in June of 2012, I was actually very surprised at the number of Canadians who had no idea that there was, over 300 Canadian police officers who had served in various capacities throughout the Afghan mission. And when I started to tell that story to people, they were, they would look at me and say, really? I had no idea. So I saw that as a gap in history because there were so many good stories to tell by the police officers that served there. So I thought, I'm going to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard and just start banging away at what my experience was. And from a selfish point of view, I was writing that story, not with the intent of publishing, but more as a record, a historic record that I could share with my daughters. So that's how it evolved. And when I moved, I initially started this when I was still living in Ontario and Ottawa. And when I moved back to Newfoundland, which is my home province, I thought maybe, this might be of interest to a larger audience. So I approached a local publisher here and just said, hey, here's the story. What do you think? And the next thing you know, I'm signing books, right?
What's so beautiful about that, Bill, is I do a lot of memoir work too. And in every memoir class, half the students are there because they want to leave a record for their children or grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
It is such a deeply embedded drive for those coming behind us to know the truth about us, right? Because your kid looks at you and you're his dad, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not Bill. You're not a cop. Afghanistan was an event. You were just gone for the holidays. but to be able to tell them the on the ground story of what you were actually going through, because I'm not a father, so I'm kind
Right.
of conjecturing here because I've heard
Yeah.
it so often, but unpack that feeling a little bit, that drive to, I've got to make sure my daughters understand.
Um, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of questions that they asked, before I left. And of course, being a dad, you want to reassure them that, things will be okay. Um, and we all know, in Afghanistan or any other conflict zones, I mean, things can change very, very quickly.
Hmm.
Um, but when I returned, I wanted to give them some understanding of why I went there. And it was to, help our Afghan colleagues, our policing colleagues, because the military was helping the Afghan military. But we were there to try and instill rule of law, security, human rights, that sort of thing. And in retrospect, we did our best while we were there, but I mean, we all know what happened 5 years ago,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is another story. But,
Right. But to your point there, Bill, politics completely aside, that
mhm,
withdrawal and the chaos around that. And you and I both know Scott Mann. I work with him very closely. All these special operators, people who had Afghan allies left behind. Um, the idea of the moral injury,
mhm,
right? The idea that, what was that 20-year war even for?
right,
Was it worth it? Again,
right,
politics completely aside, this isn't a political question at all. This
yeah,
is a moral question. This is a sense of people who went over there for whatever reason, come back. And to get really granular with you, I can only imagine that part of your daughter's questions wasn't just what literally happened, but also, was it worth being away from us for so long and putting yourself through danger and putting us through the trauma
mhm,
of missing you and not knowing if you would come back?
right. I really struggled with that after the withdrawal, and coincidentally, that's how I got connected to Scott, because I saw his testimony in front of a congressional committee in the US, and I thought, this guy gets it. He understands it. He's speaking for a lot of people. So that's how I got connected to Scott and ultimately to you through the storytelling workshops. But the one thing that gives me solace in the time that I was there, or in mission writ large, was in that 20-year window that NATO was on the ground, we allowed or helped generation of young women to go to school, to graduate, go to university, and they are out there in the world doing incredible things right now. And as the father of 4 daughters, um, that, as you can well imagine, really resonates with me. So, yeah, I mean, it was difficult to watch. It still is, when you see some of the things that are happening there, because, I mean, the Taliban want to put everybody in a time machine and bring them back to the 7th century, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, there was a lot of good things that were done while we were there. It's just unfortunate that they appear, for most people, to be all for naught.
Right. And that's so interesting too, is that part of it is the way media chooses to cover or not cover certain things. Part of it is that, sex sells, and building schools and investing in infrastructure and plumbing and farming techniques, stuff like that just doesn't get headlines. But I was just at a show in Virginia with Scott, and we were talking about this with the audience after the show. And one of Scott's go-to lines at this point is, "I wouldn't bet against the Afghan people,"
Hmm.
because most of them are not Taliban. And most of them, like you said, for 20 years, they got a taste of what might be possible. As messy as it was, they
Right.
got a taste of what's possible. And though, like you said, those girls who grew up then, they're not going to go down without a fight.
No, absolutely. And I mean, we all know that there's Afghan expats out there that want to go home, and they want to,
Yeah.
they're doing their best. Like, I think about, Legend. who I've heard about, the Afghan Mujahideen, or his father was Mujahideen, that, has been an advocate in the United States to help Afghanistan kind of, get through this terrible period with the Taliban, and get back to some semblance of um, democracy, or some semblance where, the ordinary person can have hope, and go on to do basically whatever they want, in life. So
Great. So I think the motor here is very clear inside you, Bill. So here's the kind of more fun question. How did a career Mountie become a writer? Like, what was your writing process? So I know you're writing.
oh
What's great is
yeah.
cheat code number one, you were basically writing to your daughters,
Hmm.
right? That really
Right.
clarifies things in an early draft, especially, right?
Right.
But how
Right.
did you build a writing routine? Did you take some classes? I'm so curious about someone who was not raised in a necessarily artistic background,
Right.
but I can only imagine as well that maybe there were some skills you learned, whether it's from, I imagine you wrote your share of reports as a
Correct.
police officer for many,
Yes.
many,
One
many
or one or
years,
two.
which
One or
is like
two.
bringing a lot of the elements together and creating
Yeah.
clarity through the chaos. But what was Bill's shift into creative writing? How did that work? And how did you sort of build your own writing process?
So when I was there, uh, I did a lot of journaling with the
Mm,
purpose of just having a record, because years down the road, you want to be able to look back, and, because a lot of people go through have very interesting careers, and they don't write about it. And then, years down the road, they have regrets about not documenting or writing about their experiences. So that's how it started. I was writing, journaling, that sort of thing. And I thought, when I got home, when I started rereading what I had wrote, I thought, well, it's in chronological kind of police speak kind of stuff, report, like Joe Friday, right? Just the facts, man, that kind of stuff.
yeah.
And when I initially put it all together, and I gave it to the publisher here, he he said to me when he read it, he said, "This is a really good police report, Bill." And
Damning with faint praise. Oh my God.
yes, yeah. So we kind of laughed about it, and I mean, he was on the bang on the money, right? And he said, you have to write it in a way um, that the public will be able to better understand. So with that book, it was, a lot of people don't know a lot about Afghanistan, or that part of the world for that matter. So I spent a good part of the book, especially the first 4 or 5 chapters of it, just talking about the history of Afghanistan, just laying the groundwork for the environment that we were working in. But in terms of process, it was kind of fits and starts. I would sit down, and the muse would hit me, and boom, away I go. And I could write for hours. And then, some of it was a little bit hard to get through. I'd put the pen down, walk away for a while, and it could be a month before I came
Mm,
back to it. So, it took about 6, 7 years to get it across the finish line. But at the end of the day, it was very cathartic for me to write about that. And, it also sent a message, I think, to my colleagues, policing colleagues that serve there, that, look, you know, we need, we need to put pen to paper here, and start filling in that gap, because, you know, you got 14, 15 years of Canadian police officers on the ground, as well as other police officers from around the world, including the US. Um, but nobody's written about it, because that mission was completely different from the military mission.
right.
So you're writing from a different context, and, showing that interaction between policing and the military, which wasn't always smooth, right? But at the end of the day, it was, I believe it was worth going to do. And, I would always tell people that, if we don't go there to help, that's going to come here.
Right.
So, here meaning North America, right?
Mhm. So you just touched on something, Bill. So it took about 6, 7 years to write your first book. Looks like it took another 6 years, 6, 7 years for your second book, which we're
Right.
going to get to in a sec.
Right.
But there's something you talk about, both in like in your bio, in the book blurb, in the book itself, uh, the idea that you even just said that people don't realize what the distinct difference is between military missions and policing missions.
Right.
And I can't speak for Canada at this point, but I do know, and you talk about this, that there
Hmm.
is a lot of tension right now between communities and the people who police them, between the police officers and the people that they're sworn to protect and defend. I don't know if that's the same language on your cars up there as it is on ours down here,
Right.
but that tension between holding law enforcement to high standards, but also understanding they're human
Hmm.
and 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 dealing in an honest way with the gaps that happen there, or the space that can come in. It's unreal to think that all cops are perfect and good and should never be questioned, and it's unreal to think that all cops are bad and have it out for you, right? Those are two such
Hmm.
extreme points of view, which
Yeah.
you mentioned. And I'm curious because it feels like one of your missions is to try to bring those extreme points of view back towards a center where policing is healthy again, both for the cops themselves and for the communities they serve.
Yes. Um, no, that's well articulated, Jason. Police officers are not abstract symbols. Okay. S- So, you know, they're human. They have mortgages, they have kids, they have hopes, fears, dreams, all of that sort of thing. And they make mistakes. So when a police officer shows up at a scene, it is quite possible that they could make the wrong decision. It's not through malice, it's because they're operating based on their perspective and what they have before them. Um, you hope you get it right every time. And that's the expectation from the public, is that, when you arrive there, you're going to be right 100% of the time. Well, fact is, you're not. Um, you know, the connection between the police and the public, Sir Richard Peel, talked about the principles of policing. And he said, the public are the police are the public. So there has to be that connection between the communities you police. And, yes, police officers should be held to a higher standard. There's nobody that hates a dirty cop more than a good cop, right? And there are mechanisms in place to deal with those sorts of things. But the police don't go out, in my view, and again, I can only speak from, kind of north of the border here. Um, you don't go out on a daily basis saying that you're going to persecute some group of individuals or whatever. For me, it was if you broke the law, you broke the law. I didn't care, you know, which background, sex, religion, that didn't matter. It was the fact that, you were there to uphold the law. And unfortunately, sometimes that gets twisted into a racial issue or a political issue, and then you put social media on top of that, and
Mm.
where you get little snippets that are put online. We know that, it's not nuance that trends, it's hashtags, right? And the thing is that, once the genie is out of the bottle, it's very difficult to correct.
I think this is why it's so important that you're doing what you're doing, Bill, because it's all about narrative, right? You just mentioned
Mhm.
even social media, and I mentioned, corporate media earlier, right? That the way the story is framed kind of gives away the game, right? And it can create clarity, or it can create obstacles, which is why, to get down to the individual,
Yes.
no one can argue with Bill's story, right? When you just tell it how it was, what you were feeling, what you went through, authentically,
Hmm.
vulnerably, showing your scars, look, I'm not perfect, but I tried to do the best I could.
Yeah.
That becomes a place where everyone, I think, can intersect, can agree, and get past all the noise that just gets in the way of actually making any sort of meaningful progress with the problems that arise out of something that is as daily dangerous as what you do.
Absolutely. I mean, the experiences that I talk about, my personal experiences, are certainly not unique to me. Um, there's lots of first responders out there and their families who have experienced things that make, my background, pale in comparison, in terms of traumatic events and those sorts of things. And everybody has different levels of resilience. And it's if you come out of a policing career or an EMS career or fire career, it doesn't matter, and you come out relatively unscathed, great. I mean, that's what you want, right? But sometimes, and there are a lot of us who years down the road kind of start to, I don't know, fragile is not the word, but you start thinking, reflecting, and some of these things are, come back with digital clarity, right? And some of these memories are not so pleasant, and it can disrupt your life. I know it certainly did for me.
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to go next, Bill, because I think your second book here, End of Watch, um, the the first part is just jam packed with your personal experiences, and some of them are funny, and then some of them are brutally intense
Hmm.
and graphic, not in a shock value way, but just in a this is really what happened, this is what I went through kind of way. And I know that part of your mission with this book, because the one of the whole goals of this book is one to give voice to first responders who maybe feel unseen, who've gotten to that point in their life where the things are starting to come back. PTS is for real,
Right.
but it's also for civilians to understand what the true cost is, right? So I'm curious what you're willing to share here in terms of writing End of Watch, because even in your subtitle you talk about the breaking point. Bill Malone had a breaking point. All these traumatic things you witnessed
Yep.
and investigate, and some got away, and some you caught, some you lost, some you won. But the things you saw, at what point did PTS or your mental health begin to deteriorate? And was that a big part of why you wanted to write this book?
Um, absolutely. The formal diagnosis, medical diagnosis of PTSD didn't happen until I was actually, headed out the door. I was going into retirement in late 2014, early 2015. But the lead up to that, there was a number of years before that that I knew, something wasn't quite right. And I was struggling with, what exactly is it? And, there's that sense of denial, right? Because, no, I don't have PTSD. No, I don't have anxiety. No, I don't have depression, those sorts of things. And, there's a huge fear, at least there was for me, of talking about that stuff out loud because, with my daughters and stuff, they see dad, right? Like, dad is always there, he's always reliable, those sorts of things. But when, when we started talking about some of the things, some of the challenges I had, um, that's scary, right? Because you hope that they don't see you in a different light in that, are you weak? Are you, you broken? Certainly when you're still in law enforcement, you go to a traumatic event and you come back and you never talked about how, it affected you or that sort of thing because, and I mentioned it in the book, they'd say you're in the broken toy or the rubber gun club, right? So it's just like you're, you're potentially a, uh, detriment to operational policing, and you could be a risk to not only to yourself but to others. So that's why we're taught to push it down, right? And of course, you see these iconic movies of the Mountie Red Surge, going through northern Canada and upholding the law on the northern frontier and always get your man and that sort of thing. Well, I mean, that's in the movies, right? And it's far from reality. I have a number of colleagues that feel similar to me, and I know that there's a lot more out there.
What was your journey back from that, Bill? What was writing the book cathartic? Was it healing? Did you have to go through therapy? Are there support
Yeah,
groups for first responders? I honestly don't know. So I'm just kind
yeah,
of setting you a runway here to talk about how do you and your colleagues come back from that to everyone just wants the normal life back, right?
right, right.
I,
Yeah,
I can only imagine it's also a process, but are you there? Are you still on the way? And what's that journey been like?
yeah. I mean, writing the second book was more difficult than the first one in that, I was, you're exposing all your warts and pimples, right? Like you're saying, here I am, imperfections and all. And as I just mentioned, it's pretty scary to write about. But uh, my entire goal in doing this was I know that my story is not unique, and you probably hear echoes of, Scott Mann coming out here, right? Um, and being involved with you and Scott, and being able to find the vocabulary or the lexicon to be able to describe things, and to be able to put scare stories on paper, were invaluable to me in helping me get the second book across the finish line. So, um, the entire goal is to say, look, you're not alone. Here's, and I don't expect people to do the same thing I did and go out and write a book. All I'm saying is that if you're not, if you feel that things are from your work life and as a first responder are impeding your enjoyment of life or your family life and so forth, there's mechanisms out there to help you get through that. And I was very fortunate that I had some people around me through health services and that sort of thing that recognized what was happening and got me the right supports. And to this day, I still go and get a tune up every now and again to make sure I'm all is good and I'm staying on the rails, so to speak.
What was it like? Again, what you're willing to share here, but what was
Yep.
it like with your daughters and your wife? Like when you started, were they
Uh,
aware of this too? Were they part of your healing process?
um,
Was there resistance? Was there was their own did their own feelings of losing you of their own was that part of it as well? The familial unit
mhm.
were there things to address there as well?
Um, they were absolutely remarkable in the whole process. And again, before I decided to bring the book to the publisher, I had to sit down with my daughters and said, look, some of the things I write about here are not too flattering. And it's important that you know this because I didn't want them to get sideswiped by their friends, who buy the book and they go out there and say, yeah, I read your dad's book. He's, a little bit crazy kind of thing. Right. And,
Right.
but so, to be able to share that with them because, I see it as their right to know these things before anybody else does. And I think it's only
Mm.
fitting and proper to do that. So sitting down with them, was extremely helpful, and they reacted. I'm so proud of the way they reacted to this, in that they were very understanding. They said, "Look, Dad, if this helps you, absolutely put it out there." And my wife is a nurse, so
Oh, so she's on the same front line you are.
oh,
She gets it in a real visceral way then.
absolutely. I mean, she worked 20 years in intensive care units, so you can just well imagine what sort of things she experienced there. So, I'm fortunate that, I have sort of that peer to peer, not only husband wife, but a peer to peer kind of relationship, and that, you can talk about things. But, yeah, when I had before it got published, I shared a manuscript with my wife and one of my daughters, and they, read it in 2 or 3 sittings, and, both of them were actually quite emotional when they read it, and, especially my youngest daughter, she says to me, she said, "I had no idea," and So, and there was no judgment there, right? And, because for me, I'm at the age now, Jason, where, I got more runway behind me than I do in front of me. And, if there's some lessons that I can share that could be of help to others, I want to be able to do that, right? And that was the whole goal of the second book.
Great. I'm going to pivot back to craft just for a second here.
Yep.
So you gave a draft
Mm-hmm.
to your wife and your youngest daughter.
Yep.
Which draft was that? 1, 10, 75?
Ooh,
Like what was your
yeah, good
editorial
question.
process? Was your publisher involved? Did they bring an editor in, or did they pretty much just leave you to it?
Um, I there's probably version, I don't know, 5 or 6. I mean, I
Okay.
did quite a few, and I brought it to the when I brought it to the publisher, I mean, they have their own in-house editing, and oddly enough, there was, other than some grammatical stuff, they were quite happy with it, which shocked me because my first book, when I sent it in, I was forewarned that, Bill, we're going to give it to an editor, and don't take it to heart. It's going to come back. It's going to be all marked up in red ink, and you're going to feel like you're in grade 10 and you failed an English assignment, right? So, and that's exactly what happened. So when I got it
Red
back, it
pen
was,
everywhere.
oh, I mean, they bled all over it, right? And but at the end of the day, when you understand what the editor's job is to make the book as good as it can possibly be, you understand, and the rationale for some of the stuff. I mean, they were spot on in terms of why they, put red ink through it. But
It
yeah,
must have been you must have leveled up in between then, Bill, because so you went through the red pen hell experience on book 1, but book 2 sounds like that you'd found your voice basically. Now I
mhm,
haven't read the first book, but I read the second one, and it sounds like you talking. I mean, the voice is so authentic.
yeah, and uh, I find that, well, again, it goes back to the whole storytelling thing, right? Like you have to be authentic in who you are, and to be able to tell it in a way, um, the way that you speak. And that was one of my daughters mentioned that to me. She said, as I was reading this, I could hear your voice. And that to me was high praise, in the fact that they could hear me talking about this stuff. So,
That's that's great.
I don't know where the line was where I, tripped over it and then all of a sudden started writing that way.
Yeah,
Um, but I guess in the intervening years between the last book and this book, I just started writing in a way that I thought might be, um, attractive to a reader.
awesome. I do want to I want to set you up. One of the stories in End of Watch that just stuck with me, that I read it and I had to kind of stop and just I went back and read it again.
Hmm.
You went down to Haiti at one
Yes.
point, and
Yeah.
I think this was pretty early in your career too.
Yeah.
It felt like it was one of those kind of transformative, kind of almost world-altering missions for you. You're down in Haiti. You're trying to help an orphanage, and
Hmm.
I'm just going to set that up. I'm not going to tell the story for
Okay.
you because you tell it so well. But what was that story, and why was it so impactful?
Okay. So this was back in 1996, and I was on a UN mission to Haiti at the time. And again, we were there to help train the the Haitian National Police. Um, but while we were there, I mean, you always look for opportunities to be able to help in any way that you can. And there was a Canadian military battalion on the ground there at the time. And we had heard through the rumor mill that there was an orphanage in a place called Kenskoff, which is on a mountaintop, essentially overlooking Port-au-Prince. And they were in dire need of a lot of things. It was, so armed with that information, one of my colleagues and I decided to make the trek up the mountain one day. So we're driving up this windy path up this mountain, and maybe we're about 10, 15 minutes out, and I'm looking ahead, and I can see like a red and white object sticking up through the clouds. And I thought, what is that? And as I got closer, I could see it was a Canadian flag. And I thought, what is a Canadian flag doing up here? Right. Anyway, we arrived at the orphanage, and we were greeted by Sister Donna Belizar, who was the nun who was running the orphanage. And she let us in, and you could tell, like, as soon as you walked in, I mean, you think of an average size building lot, anywhere in North America, and imagine, say, 100 kids or so that are being housed in that small space. So they have, a place to sleep, a kitchen, a makeshift laundry room, and they have this schoolhouse that just has a roof, and the walls are open. And there's a big wooden table at the front and a chalkboard and so forth. So as we're talking to Sister Donna, we ask her, like, what are your needs? And there was a long list of needs, as you can well imagine. But she talked about, rice and blankets and school supplies and, whatever we could muster. So before we left, I asked her, I said, how did you get that Canadian flag? And she said several weeks earlier, there were some off-duty Canadian soldiers who came up on their own dime, their own time, and put a corrugated metal roof over the school that would shade the kids from the intense sun and rain and that stuff. So they gave her a Canadian flag, and ever since that time, she had been flying it over the orphanage, and she called the orphanage Petit Canada, Little Canada, right? So you think about, the reasons you go and do these missions is about, the ability to help others and provide a modicum of hope to, especially to children. And in any event, we took all the information from Sister Donna. We said we'd be back in about 3 or 4 weeks. It was going to take us time to get things together. Went back down the mountain, got on the phone, calling friends, family, back in Canada. We need this, 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 and this. Got shipped down by the Canadian military. Um, packed up the vehicle when it all arrived and drove back up the mountain. And as we were backing in through the gates, all the kids are coming around, they're all excited and that sort of thing. So we start taking everything out of the vehicle and putting it on this big wooden teacher's table at the front of the classroom. So as we're doing this, I can hear Sister Donna kind of mustering the kids to come into the classroom behind us. And she's got them from smallest to tallest, right, on all these benches. And as we're putting these things on the table, I hear her say, un, deux, chanter, right? 1, 2, 3, sing. And they started singing "O Canada" in French. And I mean, it's difficult to describe the feeling. Here are all these little kids who have no idea where Canada is, but they know all the words to our national anthem. And for me, it was by far one of the most moving experiences I've ever had. And, it was one of the main reasons you go there. Like, that validated the reason we were there. We were there to help these children, right? And yeah, I mean, my partner and I, we drove back down the mountain afterwards, and there wasn't a word spoken. Like, we were just trying to process, what did we just experience? What did we just witness?
I think one of the reasons that story stuck out, and that story is in End to Watch, everybody. So that's a taste of what you can get from the book. One of the things that stuck out to me there, Bill, in that story is like you said, there were some Canadian officers before you who'd already been up there to put the roof on, as you said, on their own time, on their own dime. When you went back down the mountain to get all these supplies, it's not like you went to the supply closet. It's not like it was just down the street, the store. You called home. People, again, own time, own dime, sending things down to
Yeah.
you. right? And then you leave that up there, and like, what's the follow up, right? This is where the storytelling becomes so important because I are you still in touch with her? Do you know anything about
Yeah.
those kids? Were there more trips? Probably not. I'm intuiting. Probably
Right.
not a whole lot of contact after that, but you
Right.
did the part you could in the story then. Like
Yeah.
imagine someone trying to write the story of Sister Donna
Yeah.
and how many more different people, supporting characters like you and your partner would appear, right?
Yeah.
That rice you brought up runs out.
Yeah.
The chalk you bring up, the chalkboard runs out. This is why I feel like the storytelling component is so important because, oh, we could end it right there and say Bill's a really cool guy. So the story keeps going, man.
Yep.
And I'm curious, like, just for my own
Yep.
edification, was there any
Yep.
follow up, or then once that kind of impacted you, is that another reason why you even went to Afghanistan? Or those will have to be the moments that like spur you on in a career like the one that you chose.
Yeah. You know, I don't recall any follow-up per se, Jason, afterwards, but I often wonder, how those children, are they still around for that matter? I mean, they'd be adults now. I mean, that was 30 years ago. Did they make it to adulthood? Because one of the, I mean, devastating statistics that Sister Donna shared with us was, a lot of kids in her care wouldn't see the age of, 8 or 9 years old because because of disease or violence or whatever. And, it's a tough pill to swallow. You talk about, feeling helpless, right? You do what you can. And, that's one of the things. I mean, what makes good first responders, in my view, is that you have compassion for others. You want to help others, but it can also be a double-edged sword, right? Because that compassion fatigue that you start to feel can wear you down.
Yeah, that knife's edge between compassion and resentment, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Just oof. That's got to be part of the whole mental health journey that you're
Yep.
constantly going through as well. The support you need to stay on the side of compassion and not fall into resentment.
Yeah.
uh, all right, so talk to my listeners and viewers for a sec, Bill. How can they help you beyond just buying the book, obviously, which drops end of July, everyone, and I will include pre-order links in the show notes, and I'll send a follow-up when it drops with the link to go purchase. But beyond simply buying the book, Bill,
Yeah.
what would make all this worth it for you in terms of the writing, the publishing, doing all the podcasts and marketing you're doing, the PR? What do you hope people take away, and what do you hope they do?
Well, I'll go back to what I was saying earlier about when you look at first responders, they're not abstract symbols. There's a human behind the badge or behind a stethoscope, or like it there's people that are there doing their best. They have good days, they have bad days, and what I would ask your viewing audience is that, support as best you can the first responder community, whatever that looks like for you. And I'm sure that there's probably lots of viewers and listeners out there that have first responders in their family. And please know that it's not about what's wrong with us. It's about what happened to us. And it's that, that load that you're dragging around. And despite that, there are ways that you can lighten your load, and with the right supports, the right treatments, the having the right people around you and the right strategies. Um, I mean, you can go on and live a very happy, healthy, and productive life. And I'd certainly consider myself in that group, because since I've left policing in 2015, I've gone to work on with a Fortune 100 company. I've done consulting work on wildlife crime for the UN in Africa. I've done, like, so, you know, the skills and that you learn as a first responder are transferable to other things. And, I would just say, if there's somebody out there that might be hurting, um, sometimes just asking, hey, how you doing, right? Much like you see in the military veteran community, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's all about that peer-to-peer support and just talking to people because, if you have nobody to talk to, some of my worst moments were when I was sitting alone in my house, right? And because the mind can be pretty cruel sometimes, you got this endless loop of negative talk going on and it wears you down. And sometimes to the point where, you don't come back, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, just support first responders as best you can, whatever that may look like. And but hold them to a high standard too, right? Like particularly in the policing community, because I believe that police officers should be held to a higher standard because it's not a 9 to 5 job. You are a police officer 7/24, 365. So whether you're on duty or off duty, you still have, an obligation. You're still, it's a lifestyle, right?
Oh yeah. The calling lifestyle. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Bill, I could just keep asking for more stories from your book, but I'm going to turn to the spotlight here to wrap us up.
Right.
I always close with this. If you could ask any one person, any one question, who would it be and what would you ask?
Yeah. So I think I'm a big fan of Winston Churchill, especially his quotes, right? And I think one of the questions that I would ask him is, looking at today's world and seeing all of the turmoil, what sort of advice he would
Mm,
give to, um, to politicians, to, first responders, to military leaders in today's world. That would be one of the things, like, because, um, I find it troubling, um, to, and this is why I limit my intake of news is, it's everything is bad, right? Or
right.
seems to be, right? And, I just, I know that there's a way to kind of turn the corner on this stuff. And, I would just be interested in, because he was an individual that at times was controversial, but you look at what he did and how he was able uh, um, to get all of the British people together. When you look at, I'm trying to remember the where they took all the soldiers off the shores in France. I- they made a movie about it. I can't remember what the
Oh, D-Day. No,
it wasn't D-Day. There were all the
the,
troops were caught on the beach and they were trying to.
it was just made into a movie. I know. It was the name of the boat. I'm going to edit this out.
but when to be able to do that and still withstand fire, um,
Yeah.
from everybody. I mean, it goes back to like
Dunkirk. Oh my gosh.
Dunkirk.
Sorry.
There you go. There you go. It
Oh,
was
that felt good.
Dunkirk.
That,
Yeah.
that felt good.
But when you look at the flack that he was getting from the political side
Yeah.
versus, talking to the people and say,
Yeah.
what do you believe? And then, as my dad said to me, many years ago, you'll never go wrong by doing right. And,
Mm.
I see that as a prime example, and, but yeah, Winston Churchill would be, make a long answer longer, but,
That's great.
yeah.
And that's great. And we lose cool points in terms of pop culture and IMDb there, but that's all right. It sounds like you just snuck in question two there here. What is the best advice you ever took? Would that be your father?
Yeah, my dad, like I've had lots of great advice along the way, but both my mom and dad were very influential in my life. My mom was a nurse, and my dad was a lifelong salesman. So in terms of, interpersonal skills, knowing how to talk to people, that sort of thing. So, but one of the things he worked with salespeople at times who were only concerned about the numbers, meeting quota, that sort of thing. Whereas his view was, I'm not going to try and sell something to somebody that they don't need or they can't afford. And so this is where that whole thing about you'll never go wrong by doing right. That's where that comes from. And I've done my best to hold to that, throughout my lifetime.
Wonderful. Lastly, where can we learn more about Bill Malone? Where can we buy your book? Do you have socials you want us to follow? Like how can we follow you, learn more about you, and get your books?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of social, the only platform I'm on right now is LinkedIn. So I mean that gives a bit of my background there. But in terms of if you are interested in purchasing the book, you can go to flankerpress.com or chaptersindigo.ca. We're still working on the Amazon.com, Amazon.ca stuff, and the publisher is going to work through that. So we'll be available through those platforms as well.
Awesome. And again, that'll be end of July, end of watch at end of July.
Mhm.
And everyone, I'll put all those links in the show notes and send a reminder when the book actually drops. Bill, man, oh man, I appreciate you and your time and your service so much. Thank you so much for hanging out and sharing some of your story today.
Well, Jason, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's very kind of you to let me on your show. So thank you for that.
Page and Stage is a production of Canon Story Company, the creative studio dedicated to the art and impact of storytelling. So if you're a playwright, speaker, performer, or memoirist, or even if you're a curious reader or audience member, come check out canonstory.com for coaching, courses, publishing, and podcasts, all in the service of healing the world one story at a time. I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.